What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. We're doing a two-part series today and tomorrow. We're going to go through all 12 teams before Major 1, talk about how the qualifiers went, where they're strong, where they're weak, what they need to work on. For today's videos, we're going to talk about the top teams. This will be FaZe, Toronto, and New York, OpTic, Miami, and Seattle. And then tomorrow's video, we'll talk about Minnesota, Boston, LAG, LA Thieves, Carolina, and Vegas. So let's dive in. We're going to start with FaZe, talk about, again, what they're good at, what they need to work on, what they've struggled with. Let's take a look. All right, so Atlanta FaZe, as you can see, they are a 7-0 after stage 1, going undefeated for the first time in franchise history during the first stage of this current format. And that's because they've kind of lost the first game of every first stage until this year. And, you know, the journey that they had, and we'll scroll over a little bit here to the right, has been pretty fun. Boston took them to game 5, first series of the season. You can hear me talk a lot about the first series of the season. I don't really bank way too much into it. They had a nice clean win against Thieves. A pretty solid win against a good Seattle team, including a nice P5 invasion break to win map 4. And then you could see the caliber of opponent they played next. LAG, Vegas, and Carolina were, you know, pretty straightforward for them. Although Carolina did win map 3 and 4, which was very interesting in that series. I think Clay and TJ especially played well, but it got to that game 5 SMD and it was kind of a lock. And then I'm recording this on Monday, so yesterday they beat OpTic 3-0. So a pretty good run for FaZe. You can scroll over and take a look at the maps and modes here. Hardpoint, they look solid. And I think they've been trying to definitely play all the maps, but you can see for Invasion, Karachi, Skid Row, I expect to see a lot of those maps being the strong maps for FaZe. And I think a lot of teams probably are going to try and not really play them on Karachi. So you see this team play a lot of Invasion, a decent amount of Skid Row, and I think they're going to excel on those maps. Talking about Search, it's a similar story. They don't really play terminal S&D, although I can see them maybe, depending on the opponent, maybe dangling it in a series. But if you look at the other maps, I mean, Skid Row, Karachi, Invasion, again, I just tough to really break down this team in this game mode. And then in Control, this one has been a little bit more back and forth, but they do own a pretty good record in this mode. They have not lost a high-rise Control just yet. I can see this team, depending on the opponent, just getting rid of Invasion or Karachi if they are a team that's able to ban a map in Control. But again, the map pool looks great in Control. Doesn't really seem to be a weak map there at the moment. I think for FaZe in particular, I want to dive in on the S&D stats because, you know, this team is just efficient in this game mode right now. And again, not a particularly amazingly super large full season sample size, but we are 9 maps in here. They have won First Blood in 56% of those rounds. And of those rounds, they have converted 88%, which is best in the league. Offensive win percentage right now, best in the league. You would see First Blood percentage of 50 and 85 is pretty good. They've only lost 1 offensive bomb planted situation all season. So that's pretty impressive, but obviously it's a little bit of a, with the sample size will increase, obviously. But I think probably the most impressive to me is the defensive stats here. I mean, they've won 67% of the defenses they played. You get First Blood in 62%, and they've only tossed 2 of those rounds. You know, to me is really good stats. You see the retake percentages. You might be a little bit confused about that. They're actually pretty high up in this list. I think generally when you get the bomb down in this game, it is hard to retake. But ultimately, I think this FaZe team got better in Search with picking up draws as compared to Slasher, which is crazy to say because they were good last year. But I think with draws, they play with even more speed and more ability to rotate and really pressure people now than they have before. All right, I want to talk about 2 things I think FaZe need to work on, essentially, or things to look at going into this event. One is a game mode thing and one is sort of an individual player thing. First off, as you saw, FaZe's hardpoint record is good, but every hardpoint game for the most part they're playing are pretty close. They're won 5 of those maps by a margin between 1 and 24 points, and they've only had like 2 real blowouts here. You see 75-99 and 50-74. Now, to be fair, we're kind of holding them to Toronto's standard in which they've been blowing people out. I would say that FaZe also played a lot of Invasion and Karachi, which generally are maps that don't end in blowouts. They haven't played a lot of Skid Row, a lot of sub base where I think you can kind of really push a differential. But, you know, either way for FaZe, kind of want to see them be a little bit cleaner and win these hardpoint maps, but they're still getting them done. They're just sometimes a little bit tight on the margin. And the last thing, and I might need to zoom in so you can kind of see it. I think generally the player stats for FaZe is pretty good here if you take a look at KDs. But the one player in the one mode that I think one individual in this team needs to figure out is Draza's S&D KD has been a little bit rough this year, but they've been good in the game mode. I'm not super worried about it right now. We'll see if he can kind of turn around the differential because he's at a 0.86 right now and see if he can get that a little bit higher up. But You see, I mean, MC's got a 1-5 in the game mode, 1-4, 1-3 for his teammates. I think they're going to do fine. But just a little bit nitpicky on my part. So yeah, I don't really think much else to say about this team. They got LAG coming up. For FaZe, is really just being the best team on Sunday, and I think they did a good job expanding their map pool, playing most of the maps they could during the split. We'll see what version of team we get at the event, but you can expect them to be a hard out and potentially and likely be one of your grand finalists when all is said and done on Sunday. And so let's talk about the other team that I think will join them in that grand final, which is the Toronto Ultra. You see game modes here, some interesting things we'll get to in a second. Let's talk about the journey to how they got here, though. Fun matchup versus LAG. I think LAG, you know, kind of looked really good on that high-res S&D in this series, but the respawn's not so much. Then Toronto played Carolina and smoked them. And then a surprise loss to Boston before the break was a bit interesting. I don't know what's with Toronto whenever they play Boston, but these series are always interesting. They came back and slammed Seattle. Had a fun one against Thieves, but they dominated the hard points in that one. Thieves are a bad hardpoint team. And then some good wins against New York on last Friday, which was, I think, a little bit of a revenge game for Toronto based on the fact that they got smoked by New York at champs last year. And then a fun one against Vegas. First couple of maps were close and the last one was not. So it's been pretty smooth sailing for Toronto. They haven't gone to a game 5 yet. And the only blemish on their schedule was this sort of surprise-ish loss to Boston. I think when you look at the respawns with this team, there's a lot to like here. Hardpoint, they might be the best hardpoint team in the game. You see the average differential of 86 points is kind of wild. And if you scroll on down here, scroll, you see this team has won this 7 times this year, blowing people out. 100 plus wins, 75 to 99. 7 of their 9 wins at hardpoint have all been not close. So this team, when they win big in a hard point. There's a couple of soft spots in that map pool. I haven't played Skid Row yet, but I can't tell. I kind of went through the videos. It seems like the map's just not getting in because at the back end of the series, I'm not getting that deep. And they did play Terminal once and lost it, but again, it's like a phase. Like, I don't really think you need to play Terminal hardpoint. Just play the other maps. They're less straight up, and you're going to be able to use your skill in those situations. As far as control goes, they look good at Evasion Karachi, and they played high-rise a couple of times recently, and they've lost it to Vegas, and they also lost it to Boston before the break. So I wonder if they're going to put some work in that game mode, because that is the one control map that's a little bit soft. If they are going to come from losers bracket, it may put them in a position where they may have to play high-rise in a series against a team coming from winners. So one to watch there. I think the biggest area of improvement for Toronto is probably in S&D. You see right now, they have a close to 500 record with 2 soft maps, high-rise search and high-rise search and invasion search. They only play those maps twice to be fair, but 4-1 on the combine of Skid Row and Karachi. And I think the key thing for Toronto here, and I'll highlight their row here, and as to why I think they're struggling a bit in S&D, is they aren't really converting as many rounds as they should be. Below league average right now when they win first blood. They're getting first blood in 55% of rounds, which is very good. That's close to top of the league, but they're only winning 75% of those. It's early, but right now, if you look at sort of the average of the teams, it's around, as you see at the bottom. Actually, you can't see it because my face cam is blocking it, but if you see, it's 77.85%. So they're actually below league average on that stat. So they need to do a better job of winning their 4v3s. And it's actually a defensive thing because you see their offense stats are really good. They're winning a lot of offenses. They're getting first blood, and they've only blown 3 of those. And by the way, they've only blown 1 round this year with the bomb down and planted. You can see the problem spot here. It is on defense. Yes, they are winning a lot of defense at 65%, but they have tossed 5 rounds on defense this year. And the retakes have been okay, but below league average on that situation. So I think their defenses definitely need a little bit of work on that front if Toronto wants to step it up. And I think getting good at S&D is really key for this team, because you look at New York, it's them a second. You look at FaZe. Those are elite S&D teams right now at the top of the standings. Toronto, it's a matchup because if a series goes deep, you're not really going to favor them in that game 5. Other than that, you take a look at the individual stats here, and a lot of really good performances across the board. Inside's picking off where he left off in search. Same with Kleenex, and some weak modes here and there for some players, but overall, it's been a great split for Toronto. And I think that in sort of in my eye for them, I think they're going to make the grand final if I had to guess. I kind of favor FaZe over them just because FaZe seems solid across all 3 modes. But if this Toronto team just gets hot in S&D on land, like, they have a very good chance of winning this event. And really, I think I expect them to be competitive all year. All right, the New York Subliners 6-1. Only loss on the season was the Toronto Ultra, and we discussed that a few minutes ago. Let's take a look, other than that, about their journey. They had a banger series against OpTic to start off the season, went to round 11, game 5, so banger there. LAG took them to game 5 as well, and the Karachi S&D got a little bit close. New York was able to close that out. They crushed Vegas for the most part. Lost first map to Rocker, but we were able to run from there. Had a 3-1 with Thieves where they dropped the control, but other than that, it was fairly smooth sailing, including a pretty clean Skid Row S&D win, because that was not a fun match. So more fun map to watch. I remember that vividly. Then they got slammed by Toronto, and then they played Boston this weekend. And it was a back and forth series, and it came down to a gritty round 10 on high rise where Boston almost actually clutched. Capsule almost had an insane clutch. But I think my mark on New York so far is, look, the 9-1 record in S&D, and we can take a look at specific S&D stats, is really, really good. You see this team is getting first bloods in 56.84% of the rounds, which is highest in the league. And they're converting them at a pretty good clip. And I mean, we could scroll through and talk about the fact that, you know, they don't really throw a lot of rounds in offense. So you have one of the highest first blood win percentages in offense in the league. Defense getting first blood in 60% of their rounds, and they're only have tossed a couple, 5 in as many maps in 10 maps played. So one every other map, which is okay. And they are actually one of the better retake teams in the league. But I actually want to spend more of this talking about the respawn, because the respawn's been kind of actually interesting. I would say shaky is maybe the best to describe it. Control. I'm not really sure what to think about this team in Control. It almost seems like a pacing issue and decision-making issue with them at times. We've seen them toss quite a few Karachis, the high rises. I feel like watching them play high rise, they don't do a great job of, I think, really like trying to use time to their advantage on offense. I think a lot to work on this game mode. And as we saw with FaZe last year, if you kind of aren't a good control team, you're going to lose a lot of momentum in the middle of a series and potentially cost you wins down the road or at an event. And they don't really have a standout like bread and butter control map right now. So I'm curious to see which one they're going to try and play on land. The hard point is interesting to me. It's very interesting because they have 3 maps, Invasion, Karachi, and Skid Row, that are really solid, and they have a pretty good win record across those. You see Subbase and Terminal are soft. New York's a team definitely is trying to expand their map pool, so I can see them trying to feel it out. But again, just like with New York and with FaZe and Toronto, maybe they're just not going to play Terminal this weekend. But I'm a little worried about this Subbase because of how good Toronto and FaZe can be on this map at times. Skid Row, Karachi, Invasion. We'll see if they square up. But the one time they played like a good team this season was that Toronto series. They got slammed on Karachi. So we'll see how their hard point stacks up. I'm just a little worried about New York's respawn going into this one. And if you see with the hard point win and loss differential here, it's kind of interesting. They've mostly won their maps pretty close when they've had a couple of maps where they've gotten blown out. So interesting to see where they net hard point wise. Like they're competitive, but they aren't, I think, as good at the game mode as, say, FaZe or Toronto is. But I also want to tip, by the way, that New York is 3-0 in game 5. So that might count for something as we get towards the event. If you're feeling confident in those game 5s, this experienced team, that's pretty good. But interestingly enough, they haven't won a single round 5 control this year. So I don't know what to think about all of that. All right, nothing really to worry about when you take a look at these overall numbers for New York. Kids is always going to be in more of a support role. So in respawn, you see that he's putting up more closer to a 0.9. Which is okay because you see the rest of the team is slaying well. So I have no real concerns taking a look at this. Maybe, you know, Dante getting closer to a 1, but it's so nitpicky in S&D. Like, I feel like this team is playing good. It just comes down to, you know, what I said. Take a look at the overall stats, right? Like, control is a problem right now. That might be their biggest shortcoming when they get to this event, and why I can't really put them in the grand final right now, because look at Toronto and FaZe, and they're strong across all 3 game modes. So I'm looking to see if New York is a good respawn team in those first couple of series that play at LAN. If so, you might see your defending champions maybe make it to the grand final. We'll see. All right, let's talk about OpTic. This was a top 4 team. They probably should still be, but you see that 4-3 record compared to the other top teams. They've had a number of losses this year. So let's talk about it. And I have some interesting thoughts about where this team is right now. All right, so OpTic, as we already talked about, they had that banger against New York that came down to around 11. Honestly, OpTic tossed a couple of rounds in that game 5 search. They had a fun one against Rocker, again, another round 11 loss, but the respawns, I think they were very solid in. Seattle, we were expecting Seattle to kind of show up to this one. First map was looking close, and then OpTic kind of got off to a 2-0 lead and coasted from there. They slammed Carolina, not much to talk about there. And then the last few series are really the most interesting one. And since they gotten back from the break, this is sort of the 3 series they played. They had to reverse sweep Vegas, who's one of the worst teams in the league. They got 3-0 smoked by Miami and 3-0 smoked by FaZe. My personal opinion about OpTic right now is that, you know, they were obviously up against it in the beginning of the season because Pred missed a week due to having to go to London to get his visa appointment and get his passport stamped. So they lost time compared to other teams. Did a good job catching up. And then they just threw away all that momentum over the break. And now you're kind of getting a situation where I feel like this team is good. This team has a lot to work on, and they've kind of wasted a lot of time to really put themselves in a position to win this major. Because when you look at it, hardpoint, I think they're solid. Map pool's a little funky, right? You take away terminal, and then you look at sort of this set, and it's very interesting, right? Because outside of Skid Row, you're like, Invasion, Karachi, sub base. We got opportunities here. It's out that we can take a respawn. They're very vulnerable in S&D, and we'll take a look why in a second. And if you take a look at the control here, 1-1 in high rise, 3-2 in Karachi. They haven't played Evasion. My other issue with OpTic, and you guys know I kind of have always kind of harped on this when it comes to vetoes. This team has 3 maps that they haven't played yet, and 2 maps in particular, Subbase and Skid Row, that they have banned a lot this year. And actually, we can go to this vetoes tab on the sheet, and you can see what I'm talking about here. You see that they have banned Subbase, because they're this row. They're banned Subbase in 7 of the 7 series they played so far this year. S&D bans are pretty solid, but then you see here for Invasion, they've banned it 7 times. Listen, you can have 1 auto veto. There's no problem with that. We talked about this with Toronto and like FaZe and New York. Like, you don't need to play terminal S&D. That's fine. Hardpoint, whatever. If you have 2 auto vetoes that you always in every series ban 7-7, you are always going to be in a position where you might be letting in the other team's best map. We talked about this last year with Seattle, and it's going to kill this team if they can't figure out one of these maps. At least be confident to let it into the series. So something for OpTic to work on. Their map pool is like kind of tiny. All right, let's talk about OpTic and S&D. You know, it's kind of interesting if you dive into the stats. They're one of the worst first blood teams in the league right now, which is surprising considering the personnel on their team. They've also tossed a good amount of rounds. So not only are they not getting first bloods, they're also not winning the rounds at a 4v3 clip that you would expect at an above average percentage that they want to be in. You know, they want to be in this category. They want to be in the 80s. And right now, for the maps they played, they have not done that. And I think it's the toss rounds are mostly very much an offensive thing. You see here that they've tossed 6 rounds on offense. They're getting first blood in 51% of offensive rounds. They're only winning 71% is not good enough. It's not worse in the league. You see there are a couple of teams like Boston's at 61, Vegas at 68. But OpTic wants to be again here. They don't want to be here. They want to be here. They got to step them up and play cleaner on offense when they get numbers. And the first blood specifically getting problems seems like it's on defense. They played 42 rounds on defense and only got in first blood 17 times. 40% looks like second worst in the league at that mark. And again, they want to be here, so they need to step this up. I will say they are not blowing many of these rounds when they do get first blood, so that's good to see. But they need to do a better job of generating first bloods on defense. They also are not particularly good at retaking on defense. 22% is below league average, but I'm not really like this stat because you see Toronto's also at 22%. It's really hard to retake bombs this year, so I don't really want to lose too much composure about it until like after this event and they get a couple of more S&D maps. I want them to get more to like 10, 15 in sample size here. So I also want to see how retakes go on land before we really start freaking out about like this number relative to 26% that the league average has right now on defense. I will say when it comes to S&D, they aren't getting necessarily blown out in this game mode. They're also winning them fairly clean, but when they are losing them, they are pretty close. You see these 3 round 11s they've lost this year, and they've lost a couple of 6-3s. So they aren't getting played off the park in search, but they do need to do a better job of trying to win some of those closer maps. Because these, especially these 5, I think some of them are very winnable, especially the round 11s. I think they had a chance in those. And sometimes the rounds earlier than rounds 11 that they could have closed out. 2 more stats I want to talk about. This one is one to watch. I'm not losing too much composure about this right now, but when they win game 1, they're confident. When they lose it, they have lost quite a few series. Too small of a sample size for me to talk about right now, but let's monitor this one after the major and see where they're at. But to Gapson, they've been automatic in game 4s this year, which is really nice to see. You just see that the game 2s have been a little bit iffy and it's been a couple of these blowouts. But they are keeping themselves alive in these series, and a 1-1 record in game 5 is good at this point in the season. And I think the KD kind of mark here really gets to the crux of what I think the issue with this team is, which is just teamwork, bro. This team has no problem shooting their guns. Like, getting kills. Like, you see everybody across the board on this team is really pulling their weight. But at the end of the day, when they play better teams, and why they've been getting in trouble is it does not seem that they are on the same page that some of the better teams are on, or even like say Miami, who they're going to face in a rematch at a major one. And look, I'll give OpTic a little bit of space on this one. They made 2 changes. Toronto made 1, FaZe made 1, New York made 1. You know, there's room to kind of understand what's going on there. But this team needs to take advantage of the beginning of the season and get ahead of people, ramp up a bit. I feel like sometimes this camp doesn't do that effectively, and then they get kind of lost in the middle of the season. I feel like Kenny's not going to let that slide. So let's see how much work they can put in before this event. But for me at the moment, if we have to talk about OpTic, I just feel like this team's kind of destined at best to maybe make it to a top 4 placing. I just can't feel confident picking them to win this one or make it to the grand final. I really think that Miami match could be very problematic for them, and then they'll have to make a loser's run. And we've seen teams make a loser's run to either win or lose in the grand final. But right now for OpTic, they're farther behind the teams I did in the earlier part of this video, New York, FaZe, and Toronto. They got a lot of catching up to do to get to their level because I don't think that they are currently there. Okay, let's talk about the Miami Heretics now. A bit of an interesting journey throughout Major 1. We were really high on this team during the offseason. We're like, I watch these guys. They might be very good. And a 5-2 start has them with the 4th seed going into this tournament. And so far, as you see the map records, they've had a solid start. Let's take a look at their journey so far. So they started off the first 2 weeks by having nice victories against Carolina, Vegas, and Minnesota Rocker. At the time, all 3 teams were not playing particularly good. So we saw a 3-0 start. We're like, I don't know. Like, we want to see them play some better teams. And then they had kind of a tough week against Seattle and Boston. Seattle took them to a game 5, and Seattle actually beat them. And then Boston beat them 3-1 after Miami won the Karachi Hardpoint first map. Going into this last week, we're like, we need to see a little bit more from this Miami team before we feel like they're real. And they did that. 3-0s against OpTic and LAG in pretty clean fashion. Has them with 5 wins and a better seed than OpTic. They're actually going to rematch in Major 1. So I think with this Miami team, it's, look, bro, like they are not a young team. They have a lot of experience. Those guys have been around for a while, and they have some game modes and some maps that they are very good at. You can see the 6-1 record in control is nothing to sneeze at. Being good at control is very, very important to grinding out these long 3-1, 3-2 series. And you see their map records. 1-1 on high rise, but the invasion of Karachi is a good sign. You put them against better teams, they're going to have a chance in that game mode. What I like what they've done with Hardpoint is they have played all 5 maps. So they have decent records. Terminal, a little bit iffy, but you know, like a lot of teams, you don't necessarily gotta play Terminal. So 7-4, nothing to sneeze at. Good overall record in Hardpoint. The S&D's probably the one game mode that is maybe the most questionable here for a number of reasons. One is they've only played 3 of the maps, so we haven't seen them play High Rise Search, and we have not seen them play Karachi Search at all. Taking a look at the vetoes, and I've highlighted their row here in the specific band. So they have tried to get High Rise in a couple of the series, just hasn't gotten played. But Karachi is a map they vetoed the most in S&D, so we'll see if that holds up when they go to LAN. They're still like not comfortable at all in that map and mode combo. Some interesting stats I've kind of noticed about the team. This one is really, really interesting. When they have won game 2 this year, they've won all 5 series. When they've lost it, they've lost both series. So again, don't want to lose too much composure about these, when you win, lose series as far as games. I want to see more sample size, but I think this one's really interesting. We'll see if this holds up after the major, but one to watch with these guys. I think in particular, the game split here really gives you what I think is my best kind of diagnosis of this team. They're not going to be easy out. It's going to be hard to 3-0 these guys. They're going to win maps and take maps off of you. Do I think they're the iciest team on planet Earth against a Toronto, against a FaZe? I don't really think so, but these guys are going to take people a distance and they're going to be annoying to play. And that's why I think Miami has a good shot to get like a top 4, top 3 placing at this event. Now, I have one kind of other sort of area I want to highlight before we take a look at individual stats, which is like the one thing I think this team clearly needs to work on is generating first bloods in S&D. They are one of the worst teams in the league on it. If you look at offense, you look at defense, they're in the 40s on that. They need to get that up closer to 50. I'm not saying they have to be at 50 because all these numbers are going to come back down to earth. The numbers are going to be kind of around the high 50s to low 50s to high 40s. But 41 is not really going to do it, and they need to get that up a little bit more if they want to win S&Ds against the best teams. But 5-3 records so far, that's very nitpicky, I know. I wanted to make sure I highlighted that going forward as something to watch. see if they improve for the major. And my last piece on the team is you see a lot of great performances, but the one player individually who maybe needs to step it up a little bit is Journey. He's having a rough one in S&D with 0.78, but a 0.98 in overall KD is not too bad. Let me add hardpoint KD here too. He's having a good one in hardpoint. It's just S&D right now isn't his best mode, but overall nothing to do to be too crazy, too much to be concerned about. Having 1 weak mode at this point is understandable for these good teams. There's always people working on stuff at the beginning of the season. Overall, I feel good about Miami's chances at this event. They have to replay OpTic or a rematch against OpTic in the first round of winners. I think right now I feel like Miami's going to win that. They then have to play FaZe, who I don't think they're going to beat. So it will be a little bit of a loser's bracket climb then for Miami, and I think they can really get themselves a chance to make it to Sunday. Are they going to be able to do it? That's a real key question. But this Miami team is a team that's going to place top 6 and top 4 or higher all season. And I think it's going to start with this event. All right, last team I want to talk about is the Seattle Surge. They have some obvious weaknesses with their team. And that's why I've had them slowly sliding down these. And they're kind of the 6th team I'm talking about. Last one for this video. Let's talk about their journey so far. It's been really up and down, man. They played Thieves in Boston and looked good week 1. They looked solid in S&D, looked great in Terminal, and took care of both teams 3-1. And then kind of the inverse happened the week after that. They played OpTic, won Control, lost all the other maps. Played FaZe, won the Search, didn't win the other maps, although this FaZe series is a little bit closer than the OpTic series. And then coming back from the break, they got 3-0 by Toronto. And we were at that point like, still iffy on this team now. Mind you, this is, you know, the sort of GA controversy started to happen around this point. We'll get to that in a minute. They had a nice Game 5 win against Miami last week. And then this past weekend, they lost Game 5 to Minnesota. The thing with Seattle is this. We know they're a good S&D team, but right now, the respawn, especially against top teams, does not look good. 8-13 record right now is just not really going to cut it if they want to be an elite team. They still get top 6, top 8, sure, but I don't think that's really the goal for this team. And I think they actually got a tough bracket draw, and their lack of respawn might actually get them finishing last. And we'll get to that in a second. And you see, I think, where people are kind of attacking this team from a respawn standpoint. They see that in Terminal hardpoint, they're 3-1. Terminal S&D, they're 2-0. So in both modes, they're like, get durable Terminal out and make these guys beat us on other maps. And you see their combined win-loss record when you add in the other maps is not good. So this team needs to get better at invasion. This team needs to get better at control. Get good at invasion. They need to get good at Karachi, rather. And it's 0-3 in Skid Row is not good, and they definitely need to get better at this. They have 2 maps that they're combined 0-6 on a hardpoint. Their hardpoint map pool is tiny, and they don't really have a standout control map either. So I'm very concerned about this team as far as respawn goes. I would say if you look at the hardpoint win-loss differential, it's kind of all over the place. They've gotten blown out a couple maps. They've lost a couple close maps. They've won a couple by a decent margin, won a couple of close ones. Nothing really too crazy to point out here. Again, don't want to harp on this too much, but when they win game 1, they've 2-0, and when they've lost, they're 1-4. So we'll see that continues to stretch, but generally it kind of aligns what we just talked about, man. Like, if they're not going to win respawns, they're going to have a tough time in these series. They've actually been pretty good in game 4. 3-3 is pretty solid. You see game 1 and game 3 not too good, but if they can get deep in series, they've got a chance with how good they are in Search. And I think to speak about Seattle's S&D, I just want to take a look at one stat in particular, which is their sort of defensive stats. They win a lot of defensive rounds, 60%, getting 55, well, first blood in 55%, and they've only tossed 3 of those rounds for an 81 percentile win. So they're above average in all of that. They're above average in retakes. Like what this team does on the defensive side, they don't scam. Their offensive stats are pretty good. Nothing too crazy to write home about. Win percentage is a little bit low on that front, but I also think that they play a lot of Terminal. So I think that is a little bit, you know, a little bit something to kind of put an asterisk set on. But overall, Seattle's a good S&D team. It's going to keep them in series, but I don't think the respawn is good enough to make them super early. There's a lot to unpack when you take a look at, you know, overall KDs on this team. Everybody's got sort of a weak game mode across the board. I think the weakest player from a slaying standpoint right now is Alex. So want to see him step up on that front because he's playing good in the searches, but the respawn, not as much. Kyler's pretty up and down here. If you see Hook stats, solid for entry and hardpoint, 0.98 is fine. A 102 in control, but the 0.69 in search is a little tough, but he's getting buoyed by a good KD from Abuza in S&D, 0.94 in control, 0.97. Very surprising for Ender. This one I wouldn't expect. He's got above a 1 in hardpoint and control, but he's got a 0.9 search. I don't know if that's map driven, but I was surprised when I looked at this. I thought he'd have a high S&D KD, but he actually has second worst on his team. So the KDs are all over the place. I don't think right now anyone is sort of on the cut to get dropped on this team. But here's kind of the key thing for Seattle. They have to play Toronto winners round 1, and I really don't know if they're going to win that. I feel like Toronto, even though they're kind of iffy in search to respawn in this rematch, I don't see it. And so they're going to get bounced down. They're going to have to play the Boston Breach in losers round 1 in front of a home crowd. And I'm very concerned that Boston might be able to get it done against Seattle. And I have a very strong suspicion that unfortunately the Seattle team might actually finish dead last of this tournament. I know it's crazy to say, but between Boston, Toronto, and Seattle, someone is getting dead last of this tournament. I think Seattle might be the team between the 3 that's going to happen to. And that would be huge because I think it would totally shuffle this up quite a bit, but it would also, I think, put Seattle, kind of accelerate the thing that I highlighted over the summer. I think would happen with this team, which is between Inder and Alec, do you want to drop one of them and get a little bit of a faster player on the team and kind of match what is above you? I think if that happened, they would have to make or want to have a deep dive in that conversation because so many other teams below them are probably making roster changes. So that will do it for this video. The first 6 teams. We'll cover the next 6 on the next video. Let me know what you guys thought of the video. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments, obviously, if you liked it, and we'll see you guys on the next one.